Yes, recording is started.
Hello, everyone. This is Tikva from Homeopathy for Humanity. And this is Sanjay from Homeopathy for Humanity. Say hi, Sanjay.
Hi. Hello.
Today we are starting a series of fun, a contribution to the judgment concerning the characteristic value of symptoms by Bönninghausen. Okay, guys? Bönninghausen was a prolific author. He wrote many important things. His full name is Clemens Maria Franz von Bönninghausen. He is from Westphalia of Western Germany, which is a region. And they had an estate. And being a landowner, he was a baron. And a baron in that time period, he was born in 1785. During this time period, somebody that was a baron owned a lot of property, including usually a number of towns. So this was a major thing to be a baron in Europe at this time period. So he was a gentleman, a part of the aristocracy, probably somewhat related to some nobility. This is nobility to be a baron. And he wrote a lot of different books, as we see here. And a lot of different articles. And some of his articles are very useful, but not easily found by the modern practitioner. But in his book, The Lesser Writings of Bönninghausen, we have what we're going to go through today. Now remember that Bönninghausen was an aristocrat and he studied as a lawyer in the university in Munster, Germany. And he liked agriculture and botany very much. And he was very sick with tuberculosis, and the doctors had told him that he was just going to have to give in and succumb to his disease and die. And so he started writing his going away letters to his various friends and acquaintances, one of which was Karl Ernst August Wehai, who was a homeopath, but he didn't know it. And this man wrote Bönninghausen back, wait, send me your symptoms. See, he did not know that this friend was a homeopath. He only knew him as a botanist. And remember, people like Goethe were also part of this botany movement, Linnaeus, all the same time period where botany became a very important structural part of science. So he wrote his friend and told him his symptoms. The friend sent him pulsatilla, and lo and behold, what happened to Bönninghausen? Anybody know what happened to Bönninghausen after he was treated by the homeopath?
Bönninghausen was cured.
That's right. Bönninghausen was cured from tuberculosis by a homeopath. So what did he proceed to do? After Bönninghausen was cured, what did he do?
He became homeopath gradually. He learned
Yes.
botanical spaces, botanical name of the medicine, botanical name of medicine, botanical name, and then medicine and symptoms, and probably he met Hahnemann also later on. Stories like this something, and then he made the repertory gradually, and complete symptoms later on his together with Hahnemann. Something like this. I'm not told. I forgot.
Yes, something like that happened. So
Yeah.
he lived through tuberculosis.
Yeah.
And he decided that he was going to study homeopathy because this worked really good. And wow, he was impressed. He did not die, right? Okay, so he met Hahnemann. He studied from him directly. Bönninghausen was one of Hahnemann's main students, and he contributed a huge amount of very important literature into the body of homeopathic information for us. And he lived from 1785 to 1864, which I think made him, what, 78 years old when he died? He did not have that early death from tuberculosis. Okay, so we have here a PDF that Yitzhak made of this article that was in the journal, a homeopathic journal. A contribution to the judgment concerning the characteristic value of a symptom. Okay, so there was a conference, a great homeopathic conference held in Brussels. That's in Belgium, which is Western Europe. Germany being, I'm sorry to say, but little represented. So he says that not very many German homeopaths attended. And so people attended this meeting. They read various articles and talked about various things that were important to the profession. And he proposed to make a competition, a prize question to what makes a symptom characteristic. If we scroll up ever so slightly, this prize essay, as the homeopathic journals have been made known, so this was published in all the homeopathic journals and seen by the people who attended the conference, was intended to call out a treatise concerning the greater or lesser characteristic value of the symptoms occurring in a disease to aid as a norm or basis on the therapeutical selection of the remedy. The question was not limited to Belgium or to France, but it was given to the whole medical world. All the homeopaths all over the world were sent this in their medical journals because of its great importance. And he's saying here that in spite of the daily increase of homeopathic literature, this has so far not been solved. Nobody has been attending to this. And the silence extended far over the time set. I'll scroll up, which was computed to be liberal enough. He figured that there was enough time for this question to be reached to everybody and for people to consider it and to start sending in their essays about what makes a symptom characteristic. Okay, and nothing happened. There was a call for this to be done and nobody heeded the call. So he says, but the old practitioner will be pardoned for furnishing at least some contribution to the solution, and thereby again calling attention to the question. The teaching of the organon. Okay, so he says that he's going to answer the question himself because nobody else has. How does that sound? That's surprising. There's a great congress of people getting together, talking and thinking, putting stuff in journals, putting out information. People are communicating. Homeopathy is pretty well established, but nobody answered this question. Okay, so let's stop here because he's going to be looking at, he says that aphorism 153 gives us the great answer to this. Anybody want to read this aphorism?
Bauna?
Well, she says she has low battery. Okay, I'll go ahead and read it. In seeking for the specific homeopathic remedy, for example, in this juxtaposition of the phenomena of the natural disease and the list of symptoms of the medicines, in order to discover a morbid potency corresponding in similitude to the evil to be cured, the more striking, particular, unusual, and peculiar characteristic signs and symptoms of the case should especially and almost solely be kept into view. For there must especially be some symptoms in this list of the medicine sought for corresponding to this, if the remedy should be the one most suitable to effect the cure. The more general and indefinite symptoms, such as lack of appetite, headache, weariness, disturbed sleep, uncomfortableness, etc., in their generalness and undefinedness, deserve but little attention unless they are more especially pronounced, as something of such a general nature is seen in almost every disease and in almost every medicine. Okay, so let's not scroll down anymore. I wanted to talk on that point there. Can you go back? Okay, so we have here, okay, he has the general and indefinite symptoms, such as lack of appetite, headache, weariness, disturbed sleep, uncomfortableness, etc., in their generalness and undefinedness, deserve but little attention unless they are more especially pronounced, as something of such a general nature is seen in almost every disease and almost every medicine. Therefore, when we have something like this, Hahnemann is going, not Hahnemann, Bönninghausen is going to tell us how we make things like headache characteristic, how we make disturbed sleep characteristic, and in like what way is the patient uncomfortable. So it no longer stays as a general, because when we question the patient for things like time modalities, physical modalities, different sensations, whether or not something is stabbing, burning, all the different types of pain, and it's various things like the weariness, like what type of weariness, what type of disturbed sleep, at what time does somebody wake, what wakes the person. All these little things make things more characteristic. And this essay is all about that. Even when Hahnemann adduces an aphorism 86 and those that follow only contains some examples which are given without any systematic order. Okay, in aphorism 86, we have a list of things that we want to talk to the patient about. It gives us some guidelines for case taking. But there's nothing that really helps us remember what we need to do as homeopaths. And this is where Bönninghausen answers this question in this very interesting essay. So he says, to impress upon the memory a requirement which in all such matters must appear to be of very great importance. How do we remember what to do when we are case taking, and what we need to require from the patient in order to elicit characteristic symptoms? This is very, very important. So he says that he searched far and wide. He looked through all the medical writings, allopathic, homeopathic. And then he remembers from the medical school in Salerno. The medical school in Salerno was very, very, very famous. Salerno is part of Italy, and it had a medieval medical school that was extremely important throughout Europe. Anybody who had an opportunity to go to that medical school, they went. And probably about 2 weeks ago, I posted this Scola Saliterna and the diet. I posted this document that Bönninghausen refers to in the homeopathic group a couple of weeks ago. And it's made into little verses and aphorisms that are intended for the study of hygiene. It's a very, very interesting historical document, and it is in the group. So Bönninghausen, he took information, he's referring us to the medical school in Salerno with the rhymes about, and he says this is from the 12th century. And Bönninghausen did something else that was very interesting of an earlier date. He took the aphorisms of Hippocrates and added to them with glosses by a homeopathist. And you see from time to time, I post a little bit from that booklet in the group. So Leonine verse is a type of rhyming verse that was used particularly in medieval Europe. And he couldn't find anything that seemed to be of proper nature that he needed in order to inscribe in the memory what people need to do on their day-to-day homeopathic engagement with the patient. But he found a hexameter dating from the same time period from the theologic scholastics. Okay, so he went to religion instead, a certain John of Milan. I tried to find said John of Milan, but I was unable to do so. And he says, this is indeed of a somewhat jolting construction. Nevertheless, it contains briefly and completely the various momenta according to which a moral disease is to be judged as to its peculiarity and grievousness. So religious people, I think that this would probably be, I'm going to postulate here since it is from Milan, that the Roman Catholic Church made this here in order to be able to judge moral disease. They use this hexameter to be able to, when thinking or studying about the moral quandaries of mankind, they have this. And Boenninghausen's like, I am going to use this and apply it to homeopathy. Quis, who, quid, what, ubi, where, quibus auxilius, what aids, cur, commodo, how, quando, when. The 7 rubrics designated in this maxim seem to contain all the essential momenta which are required in the list of the complete image of a disease. May I be allowed, therefore, to attach my remarks to this scheme, with the desire that this hexameter, which was formerly used only by theologians, may now also be impressed on the memory of homeopaths, and be put to use by them. So he says, learn this, and this jaunty little song is going to help you with your everyday practice so you do not forget the work that needs to be done. Quiz. Who? That is what we want to answer first of all. We can look at the aphorism 5 and 6. Wait, you're going too far for me. My screen's not that tall. As a matter of course, the personality, the individuality of the patient must stand at the head of the image of the disease, for the natural disposition rests on it. Did we have a question? A comment? Think not. Okay. Okay, quiz. For this belongs, first of all, the sex and the age, then the bodily constitution and the temperament, both, if possible, separated according to his sick days and his well days, insofar as an appreciable difference has appeared in them. So here we go back to aphorism 5 and getting the background information of the patient and comparing it with what we fill out from aphorism 6, where we get the current state. So what we can do, and Yar also talks about this technique, and we recently discussed it in the group in the case of a little boy who was getting sick too often, if we remember this from the group. Okay, so we want to find out this information about the person and then separate his sick days from his well days, insofar as an appreciable difference has appeared in them. So we want to look at the difference between the sick and the healthy. In all these peculiarities, whatever differs little or not from the usual natural state needs little attention. But everything that differs in a striking or rare way therefrom deserves a proportionate notice. Okay, so he's like, you take the case, you get the information about the person. Then you get the information about the person during their sickness. Then you want to compare the two. And whatever that differs only a little bit, we don't pay much attention to. Anything that has any striking difference is important. So you're just going to separate the general normal symptoms of the patient, the normal personality. We're not really using personality here. We want to look at what deviates from the norm. Does that make sense? That's all we're looking at. Everything that has deviated from the normal state in the patient is of the greatest and most important. Variations are here found mostly in the states of the mind and spirit, which must be scanned all the more carefully if they are not only sharply distinct, but also of rare occurrence, therefore correspond to only a few remedies. Okay, so at the top of this here, after we've separated the sick state from the well state, and we wanted to only look at the things that are the changes. And when we have our list of changes, anything that's on the mental and emotional level, in this change, the changed state, the changed mental state, the changed emotional state is very important and might belong to only a few remedies. So let's say somebody gets sick and they become more active. That would be important. Let's say somebody gets sick and they take no interest at all in anything. That might be important. So anything that's of the mind and spirit must be scanned all the more carefully. What does he mean by scanned? I think he means inquired. Tell us more about it. It's like, you know, when you're doing a case taking and you keep saying, and, va'az, and, because we don't want to really ask open, you know, we don't want any questions that are like a yes or no. We want to just keep that person telling us, you know, how things have changed, how they're feeling, or what's undergone in their situation. Okay, so the most important variations here might be found in the mind and spirit because they correspond to only a few remedies. In all such cases, we have all the more cause to fathom these states with all possible exactness, as in them frequently the bodily ailments recede to the background. Here we're getting into the aphorisms of mental and emotional disease. When the physical symptoms recede to the background. Okay, I lost my place here as we scrolled. In all such cases, we have all the more cause to fathom these states with all possible exactness, as in them frequently, the bodily ailments recede to the background, and for this very reason, offer but few points for our grasp, so that we may be able to make a pure selection among the remedies which compete. And as you've seen here, Hahnemann would be using materia medica pura and or the chronic diseases to do his symptom matchup to build his case. Paragraph 104 of the Organon makes it the duty of the homeopath to make a written scheme of the image of the disease, and whoever has once acquired a certain facility in this will easily know how to satisfy this requirement and acquire a certain specializing penetration, which will prove to him of ever increasing usefulness. For as every man presents an individual nature different from every other one, as every medicine must be exactly adapted to this individuality in agreement with the symptoms, which it is able to produce in the total man, so at once this first investigation of the quiz, a great number of medicines are thrust aside just because they do not correspond to the personality of the patient. Now remember, he's talking about the sick personalities, not talking about the well personality. Do we have an example of how people might change when they're sick? Sanjay, can you say something about that?
He's actually talking about the change state at all the levels, on mental, spiritual, or you can say emotional, and even on the physical part, which been what Hahnemann said in Aphorism 5 and 6. So here what Bönninghausen is saying, when we are considering only this change state, the remedies, number of remedies will be becoming more and more narrow.
Right. He uses the word thrust aside. A great majority of medicines will suddenly become thrust aside if they do not correspond to the changed mental state of the patient. But if there is no changed mental state in the patient, we're not using this here. There has to be a changed mental state in order to use changed mental state, because those are the rules. Okay, so we will be able to exclude from our list of remedies that we have based on the mental state changes. The spiritual and dispositional individuality of the patient here gives the most important, often almost the only deciding point for the selection of the remedy. Where the disease involved is one of the mind or spirit, and generally the two disturbances present themselves so conjoined into one that the signs of the one only receive their full and definite character from the other. Hahnemann indeed recognized the importance of these two momenta from the beginning, but the necessity of weighing the two in their connection with one another, he only recognized later on in its full measure, and he then placed symptoms proper to the two, which in the first provings had been separate, one making the beginning and the other the end. He's talking about mind and sensorium. Mind and sensorium are separate in the earlier provings. And in the chronic diseases, they immediately follow each other. An improved arrangement, which we also find in the best works on materia medica pura of later times. So the earlier provings, as we've noticed, if we're watching the proving videos, we will see that the sensorium and the mind symptoms are separate, with sensorium being the beginning of the schema and the mental state being at the end of the schema. And remember, this is all proving data and has nothing to do with stories or personalities or any kind of elaboration. We're talking about pure proving data. So Hahnemann corrected that and put mind sensorium. Okay? So we're looking at the change state. Now we'll continue reading. Many other things belong to this rubric, but concerning the bodily individuality and presenting, as it were, the chief features of the portrait of the patient are contained in those books under the heading of general. It would be desirable and would greatly facilitate the use if everything not pertaining thereto should be excluded, and the former be brought under a particular rubric denominated either individual or personal, in such a way that the corporal would present a separate picture, as has been done with respect to the spiritual and mental. So he postulates here that we could do like two separate analyses, one belonging to the personal and the individual, and one belonging to the body. Okay, do we have any questions about that? Because it's really full of very meaty matters. So we have here, we want to know the sex, the age, the bodily constitution. What does bodily constitution mean? Yep, the physical makeup. Very good.
How our patient looks like.
Yep.
Lean, thin, fatty, skin, every minute physicals, if you have any prominent for us.
Yep, and then the general
That is
temperament.
bodily makeup.
Yep, exactly. And the temperament. And if possible, separate these according to his sick and well days. And everything that is the same between his sick and well days, we leave it alone. Everything that changes between the sick days and the well days, we use those if they are striking. Okay, so let's go ahead and do what, quid, what. The second part of our hexameter here. Of course, this question refers to the disease, right? What? The disease. For example, it's nature and peculiarity. It may be unquestionably received as an axiom that we must first know an evil accurately before we are able to give any effectual aid against it. Okay, so we need to know what the disease is, because if we don't know what the disease is, we are not going to be able to give effectual aid against it. We have to know the evil. We have to know the disease. That occasionally relief may be given without having first recognized the nature of the evil. When he means evil, he means disease. As little refutes this axiom, that the fact that an unexpected event occurs frequently, which lies outside our computation, and which either leads to good or evil, while neither the good will nor the knowledge of the physician have the least to do with it. But this axiom must be associated with another, which is no less true and no less important, namely this, that we must also know and possess the means which are able to relieve the evil when it is recognized. Where these are lacking, the former are of course no avail. So we need to know what the disease is, how it manifests in the person, and we also need to know how to relieve this disease when we see it. And if we do not have an understanding of the true character of the disease, and if we do not have an understanding of the true cure or potential cure of the disease, then we are lacking, and this isn't going to work well for us. Since the times of Hippocrates, thus since more than 2,000 years, very much has been done with respect to the first point. They know a lot more about disease, he's saying. And we have especially enjoyed a great progress and enlightenment within the last century and up to modern times. There were a lot of things that changed in this time period. The microscope was invented, the stethoscope was invented. There are things that really helped people understand disease up to this modern time of Bönninghausen. Now we have even way more, off the charts more, ability to understand what disease is. The path of pure observation and experience, for which a time has been pretty much forsaken, and on which that ancient father of the healing art had gathered his valuable material, has again been entered upon. Okay, now he goes on to say that the path of pure observation and experience, which had been forgotten, forsaken, we all know that rubric, forsaken, it had been neglected. Okay, so the path of pure observation and experience, which had been neglected and which Hippocrates had gathered a lot of this valuable material, has again been entered upon by who? By who? Anyone? Who took up the sword on pure observation and experience that Bönninghausen's mentioning? Okay. Who?
Anyone?
Yes, Hahnemann. So Samuel Hahnemann took up the sword of pure observation and experience once again. And that is really important. Okay. At the same time, our contemporaries possess and use the great advantage enduring to them from the fact that they stand on the shoulders of their predecessors and can thus view a greater circle of vision, and more especially that astonishing progress has been made in all the subsidiary sciences, especially in chemistry and anatomy. So also they have had the advantage offered them by many physical instruments, which it must be confessed they have used with industry and care. By these means, the modern physiological school and at the same time, the diagnostics of disease have reached an excellence not attained in earlier times. Yes, so during Bönninghausen's lifetime, they were able to discover and find out which people had diabetes. They had equipment now to listen to people's hearts. And they had the ability to use a microscope, not like, the microscopes we have today, but an everyday schoolroom kind of microscope to look at pathology. And so diagnostics and physiology and anatomy and chemistry had made great advances in the later half of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. And that is important, and we have progressed exponentially so here in 2022. We now have things like the electron microscope. We have MRIs. We have a whole host of modern diagnostic tools. We have blood tests. We have different ways to look at imaging. We have genetic information. There's so much more now. And some of these things that are new inventions, we actually have to be somewhat careful with. For example, some of them are dynamic. The CT scan, is a dynamic energy machine, and we have to be careful with that. Okay. Now he continues to say, the only thing which every homeopath has to complain in this matter is that things are conducted in too general a manner for his doctrine, and that almost universally diseases are described and treated under the same name, which differ essentially in their nature and require for their cure very different medicines. Okay, so he recognizes that very, very important things have happened scientifically with diagnosis and all that, but the homeopath must complain that this only gives a very, very small viewing into what might interest a homeopath during the case taking. It's nice to know when the person has high blood pressure. We need to know, and we need to be able to monitor that during treatment. But there isn't such a thing as, okay, blood pressure treatment. We see it 1,000 times. People say, okay, what is the specific? What is the protocol? What is the this? What is the that for such and such disease? But this is not how a homeopath approaches a disease. The disease name is almost irrelevant. An immediate result of this failing is
Hello? Hello?
Okay, where were we? We lost my internet. They're actually bringing me a new router tomorrow morning, hopefully. Okay, so the immediate failing is that homeopaths can only make very limited use of the great advances made by the dominant school in diagnostics, since they generally excludes every special direction of the suitable remedy. For example, liver disease doesn't tell us anything. We need to know how that liver disease manifests in the patient. We need to know the particular signs and symptoms, modalities, sensations, time, location, where the pain is felt, etc., etc., etc. We need to get into the details. A homeopath's job is not to take a diagnosis or read a piece of paper that has somebody's ultrasound results in it, but to get with that person and get into the meat of the matter and say, how are you experiencing this illness? Explain it with the greatest detail possible. And then you talk it through with the person in order to get the information needed to prescribe a remedy that is most similar to the person's disease state. Now, since the modern materia medica of allopathy, as well as the older one, moves in the same generality, the conclusion follows almost inevitably that even the most cultivated allopath often stands undecided when he is to make a choice of remedies, so that almost every one of them will order something different, and that he is usually compelled to mix many things together in order to cover the various indications. Now I'll make a little aside here. Modern pharmacy has solved that problem. If somebody says they have heartburn or acid reflux, they have their pamphlets given to them by the big pharmaceutical companies, and they know that they're going to try in various order the one that is the least expensive for the medical industry. But at least that's how it works with this socialized medicine. Socialized medicine gives their doctors a sheet of paper for the diagnosis of which medicines to try in which order. And it depends on things like, whole scheme of things like, how much does it cost, the health fund, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So nowadays, people have just this general scheme of do A, B, C, D, or E, depending on various things. So we are no longer have people making different mixtures to cover the various indications. Rather, nowadays, we have the various illnesses being given separate drugs. It's a different form of polypharmacy. Okay, back to Bönninghausen. More about this will be found in the course of this short treatise in a more suitable place where the other questions are also discussed. Here I can only say so much about it. A, that the most penetrating and most indubitable diagnostic as offered by the best allopathic manuals is rarely, if ever, sufficient for the homeopath, so as to enable him to make a sure selection of the remedy, and that B, such a diagnostic at most, and even then not always, may serve to exclude all those remedies from the competition which do not correspond to the common genius of the disease, but which seem to act specifically on other parts of the organism. Okay, stop here. Okay. So Bönninghausen is reminding us that the diagnostic can at times exclude remedies from our list. And that the diagnosis may occasionally select to narrow our list. And there's not much else to be found that is of interest to the homeopath. Because if somebody has, let's say, heart palpitations, we need to know, we can't just say, okay, there's a remedy for heart palpitations. You know, we have to go in deeper into the information, find out when it occurs, how it occurs, etc. So if there's like heart palpitations that are in the morning, that's going to narrow our information down even more. If the heart palpitations happen during certain motions, that's going to also. So we are only able to use diagnosis to a very limited degree. Therefore, it's not of much value. Like if somebody says they have diabetes, we want to know how that diabetes is for them. If somebody says they have headaches, we need to know what those headaches are for them. We need to know the person and how things are manifested in the individual. And thank you, Sanjay. We are going to go to Ubi, the seat of the disease, next week. Okay, guys, thank you very much for joining us today as we went through the first 2 points of Bönninghausen's hexameter concerning the characteristic value of symptoms. Join us again next week, God willing, and we will continue.